Hello and welcome to episode 61 of Linux After Dark. I'm Joe.
I'm Chris.
I'm Gary.
And I'm Dalton.
Welcome back, chaps. So today I want to talk about trust. How do we decide which devices to trust and which software to trust? Now, the obvious thing to say is, well, if it's open source, I trust it. If it's proprietary, I don't. But I think that it isn't quite that straightforward, is it?
No, I think there's a bit more of a broader conversation around it, isn't there? Because sometimes projects are people as well. So you can have a FOSS project where you can see all the code, but you might not like how it's maintained or managed or the attitude of the community. I'm not going to name them because I don't like riling people up, but I have two very specific examples of FOSS projects that you can see every single line of code if you want, and the technical achievements in both of them are incredibly high, but I'm not going to use either of them. I personally look at the communication, which you can see all over the internet for both of these projects, and that alone means I'm never going to use them because of the attitudes of the people involved. And I wouldn't trust them as a result, if you see what I mean, because I feel like it's genuinely at a level where the people involved are incredibly aggressive. So I wouldn't feel confident that an aggressive commit might not be pushed to a repository, for example. It's that kind of level.
You know what I do in that same vein when I'm looking at proprietary software or when I am continuing to use it or deciding whether I should be looking for alternatives? Is I look at the Glassdoor for the company that is making it. Of course, it doesn't work for like small businesses, but for those, you can just call them and probably get all the information you need. But for example, I'm going to name and shame here, Discord. If you check out Discord's Glassdoor in the past about a year, it has been absolutely tanking with people complaining about how terrible it is to work there. And that makes me think, maybe I should be looking for alternatives so that when things do hit the fan, I have somewhere to take my friends.
Well, you'd also imagine that the quality of code coming out of it has got to have gotten progressively worse over that time if people are really that annoyed.
I think you can just use Discord and learn that one.
No, I don't know. I've never used it. I refuse. I opened it once and the UX looked like it was designed for a toddler and I've never touched it since.
Hello, I'm a toddler.
Shots fired at Gen Z. I don't think that Glassdoor is necessarily that good of an indicator, though, because isn't it quite self-selecting for people who left and therefore probably don't like the company?
It's probably like any reviews. You're going to get two polar opposite ends of it. You're probably only going to write a review if you're really, really annoyed about something, or you had a really terrible service, or if it was really great. Seldom are you going to do it in between. And what I've often found with Glassdoor in particular is that for every terrible review someone writes, there's some middle manager somewhere who gets told by HR to go and write a decent one, so it evens it out.
Yeah, you definitely need to be taking into account the themes of the reviews between good and bad to figure out where the truth might actually lie. But at the same time, comparing the star values against like, okay, this is Canonical's Glassdoor, and this is Discord's Glassdoor, and those are the star ratings and the number of reviews and everything, and you can kind of start to piece together, should I trust this?
Well, Canonical's Glassdoor is a bit of a shit show, isn't it?
That one is too. Maybe Red Hat would be a little bit better of an example, but I think IBM's been tanking that one too.
I think I get pushed and pulled and definitely have blind spots. So in some areas, I'll relax the level of trust I'm putting into something for the functionality, and it's a case-by-case basis. And I think everyone has different hills that they die on, and people seem inconsistent, don't they? You think, why are you so passionately not going to use that thing? But let me lay this at your feet, which you do use. Well, I've made a compromise there. It always has to be taken on a case-by-case basis, I think.
You leave my PF sense alone, Chris. It's perfectly fine.
Come on, just use OpenSense.
But then I've got to redo all the config and stuff. It's fine. It works. It reads packets. What more do you need?
I think that is a really interesting point, because I'll use, say, my Synology box, which is using some ancient base Linux distribution and an ancient kernel at this point. But if I found an embedded device that was using, say, Ubuntu 16.04, which I suspect, though I can't confirm, is around the same vintage at this point, I'd be upset. I'd throw the device out. Synology, they're okay, though.
Well, it's like I seem to be fine trusting the Fire Stick that I've got, the Amazon spying device, just because it puts stuff on my TV easily. And yet I would never trust a Windows device on my network.
That's what I was thinking about. Smartphones and media consumption devices are where I just have given up. I've lost the will. And I do find it sad. I do miss the feeling of running Lineage on a phone. And yes, I did flash the Google app. So it's not, the purebred, absolute vanilla AOSP experience. But I can't do it. And it's the same with the media consumption thing. I'm the same as you, Joe. Like, I do have a Fire Cube, which I use to consume media just because I was fed up with faffing about. But then on other things, when I was recently distro hopping, I seem to have landed on Debian. And one of the reasons for that is I don't want any companies faffing about with anything. And that's what I feel like doing at the moment. And I'm not saying that Debian is perfect. It's slow and there's a really difficult structure, I think, sometimes for how you maintain it, how you get anything pushed. You look how long it took for non-free firmware images to become the default, which I think is a good move. But it's the shifting sands where in one area I'll go in one direction and in another I won't. And it will seem weird to other people there's definitely going to be people who are the polar opposite of that.
But I don't really trust that Fire Stick because if I'm not actively watching something on it, I unplug the power to it. And I know it's going to shorten its life, power cycling it every day, but I don't care. I'm not having it just sitting there listening to me, man.
But I think there is a difference, isn't there, between what you're willing to trust for something like a media consumption device or a phone and something that you use for general purpose computing. I guess for us, maybe those things aren't necessarily the same, the phone and the general purpose computer, although for a lot of people they are. There is no way in hell that, like you said, Joe, I would run a Windows machine as my day-to-day computer, but I'm perfectly willing to use a Mac. So it's a little bit of a strange one.
Why? What's the difference between Microsoft and Apple in this case?
I don't know. I can't put my finger on it. That's the weird thing.
Apple's making some damn money off of you. Microsoft isn't.
Yeah, exactly. Apple sold you a really expensive device.
Well, yeah, although increasingly I'm getting a bit miffed at the security flaws that we've seen recently in like the iOS devices and some of it in the silicon itself. That gives me a little bit of a pause. But equally, I'm willing to make that trade-off because it is a machine that I can buy, and every Mac I've bought has lasted 8 years, and it's kind of been okay. Whereas I haven't had that experience with, say, a ThinkPad or something that I've gone and bought. There's always been something that's broken or gone weird after a little while.
That's interesting because there are also well-known flaws in manufacturing in Apple devices too. Sometimes it's surprising that you can get that long out of them with things like they made the display ribbon cable too short, so if you open and close it too much, it just disconnects and shorts itself.
Butterfly keyboard.
Yeah, there's all of this stuff. But that's, I guess, where I've drawn a line, is that I'm happy to use one proprietary platform with a set of flaws and not another. And sometimes the reasons behind that aren't always logical. I guess like Joe's unplugging of the Fire Stick. There's just something that makes you uncomfortable about having it plugged in all the time. You can't necessarily say for sure it is or isn't doing the thing you think it's doing, but that's just where you're happy to draw the line. You'll use the thing, but you won't necessarily leave it on all the time.
Yeah, the day-to-day computing thing is interesting because it's really inconsistent if I take a step back from myself. All of my personal documents are client-side encrypted, and I would never dream of having them on Google Drive. It winds my wife up something chronic and my accountant. I always do like an anonymized drop to her with a password and a self-destructing file share. There's just something about that information that I just don't want people to have. Now, it's probably stupid. I'm sure that there's plenty of people in suits taking money in brown envelopes for that information as I speak. But it's just always been what I've done. Whereas I'm not so bothered about Amazon knowing what I've been watching, for example. You feel like you're making a considered choice. But I think if we all actually fully audited this for each other, we'd immediately start going, hang on a minute, you're doing that, but you're not doing this. Explain yourself. And we'd all sort of stutter and, I don't really know.
Okay, this episode is sponsored by Kolide. What do you call an endpoint security product that works perfectly but makes users miserable? A failure. The old approach to endpoint security is to lock down employee devices and roll out changes through forced restarts, but it just doesn't work. IT is miserable because they've got a mountain of support tickets, employees start using personal devices to get their work done, and executives opt out the first time it makes them late for a meeting. You can't have a successful security implementation unless you work with end users. That's where Kolide comes in. Their user-first device trust solution notifies users as soon as it detects an issue on their device and teaches them how to solve it without needing help from IT. That way, untrusted devices are blocked from authenticating, but users don't stay blocked. Kolide is designed for companies with Okta, and it works on macOS, Windows, Linux, and mobile devices. So if you have Okta and you're looking for a device trust solution that respects your team, support the show and go to kolide.com/LinuxAfterdark to watch a demo and see how it works. That's KOLIDE.com/LinuxAfterdark. Quick bit of admin then. First of all, thank you everyone who supports us with PayPal and Patreon. We really do appreciate that. If you want to join those people, you can go to linuxafterdark.net/support. And for either $5 or $10 a month on Patreon, you can get an advert-free RSS feed of either just this show or all the shows in the Late Night Linux family. And if you want to get in contact with us, you can email show@linuxafterdark.net. What I find weird is people who use Plex. I do not understand why anyone trusts that company.
Because 10 years ago when I started using it, I did. And now it's really hard to move away from.
Yeah, that's it, Gary. I'm exactly the same. It is literally since, I think, 2011, I've been running a Plex server. It's morphed into what it's become now. And I have recently stood up Jellyfin, to be honest. And I do like it, but it's not quite the same. There's things that I miss. Like there's a plugin for subtitles, for example. You can script it pulling subtitles in a language of your choice with Jellyfin. But the clients on Plex have an Open Subtitles API plugin, which is being enshittified, by the way. So that's going away. So that's not very nice. But the idea that you can just get a film and say, I want the subtitles for this, and using the API, it gets them from the website. You're not trying to script that. There's all these things that I'm just used to and I continue to use. But I do take your point, Joe. You know, the fact that Plex is banning Hetzner IP address ranges means they know what's going on. And it's a fair point that you're making.
Well, at some point, someone added me to their Plex server so that I could watch the stuff that they had. And then recently, I started getting an email every week. This person has been watching this, that, and the other. I'm like, how do you know what they've been watching? And why the hell are you telling me?
Jellyfin's transcoding engine is very good. But the reason why so many people pay for Plex Pass over the years, and the reason why they've gone down the route of making it partly proprietary, is because that element of it has been really good. And I don't know, I'm souring on it. This is why I stood up Jellyfin, because that's part of it, Joe. Yeah, exactly. They've done this weekly email, and I was the same. I was like, oh, your highlights of watching, and you're like, oh. And of course, all the content is legally ripped from my extensive Blu-ray collection, so I'm not worried about that side of things, obviously.
Yeah, of course. Like me, you watch Big Buck Bunny every day.
You know, I've never watched Big Buck Bunny through to completion. Never once.
I've used it to test 4K and stuff quite a few times because it's just an easy file to get.
For us, actually, the main thing we use Plex for is TV. We've got an HD home run on the network and we use it to watch live TV, and nothing is quite as good as Plex for that live TV stuff.
It sounds to me that the answer to the question of what do you trust is what is convenient.
Well, kind of, but if you use my example of documents, it would be far more convenient for me to just dump it all on Google Drive. And then when my wife asks to see something to do with the accounts, I just say, here's a link, or just look in the shared folder. Instead, I'm like, oh, I need to turn my laptop on, connect to the Wi-Fi, make sure SyncThing has pulled down my cryptometer vault, mount it with Fuse, then open it in LibreOffice. I mean, is that convenient? No, it fucking isn't.
No. Similarly, I use Google Drive for stuff like show planning and whatnot, but my accounts, the real stuff, that is LibreOffice and my NAS. It's not super encrypted like yours, but it doesn't leave my network, in theory at least.
See, I think for me, it's a bunch of decisions that I've made over the years that are hard to back out of.
Yes.
And I'll reevaluate them from time to time. Like my Nextcloud server used to be public, now it's not public, and things like that. It's sort of a bunch of decisions I've made over time, platforms that I've bought into, and then I slide on a scale of convenience to security or trust or whatever. And I roughly end up somewhere where I'm comfortable.
Trust as technical debt is what you're talking about.
Pretty much, yeah. Like Plex is probably trust I put in an organization that is now tech debt. But to back my family and everyone I share that account with out of that is a really difficult thing. So therefore, actually, I just have to fall on the side of, I hope that they're doing the right thing most of the time.
We all make mistakes in the heat of passion, Jimbo.
Plex is essentially technical debt as a service.
Pretty much, yeah. But then arguably so is my Nextcloud server. Like there's a lot of stuff that's installed on that I probably wouldn't install today in terms of apps and plugins and things like that. Like I even use it for my RSS reader. Do I need to be running the RSS reader as a service on a box that's running PHP and everything else? Not really. Did I put those feeds in there ages ago and it's just become habit to click that icon on my phone? Absolutely. Unlikely to change it at this point. Same with calendars and documents.
I always used to think, like with Google, for example, I used to try and explain this when I was supporting clients, normies, if you like. They would ask me, what do I do about my files? And the problem is, I told them what I do and try and explain ZFS and replication and dumb it down. And their faces would just drop really quickly, however much I tried to simplify it. And I said, of course, you're not going to do that. So you might want to look at something like cloud. And in which case, I would try and explain to them things like Microsoft and Google. The conversation I used to have was, they can see everything, but they probably won't lose it. But more recently, fuck that. Microsoft and Google have just lost files for people. So my thought was always, well, it's massively replicated around the world. If there's a data center failure, a huge weather event, they're not going to lose your files. Yes, they can see it, but as long as you've picked a good password, it's unlikely that they're going to get hacked compared to this service over here, which is smaller and is offering cloud storage, but is using Okta or something for their authentication. It's just been hacked over and over again because it's all offloaded. But when you reflect, you think, oh shit, like especially the recent Google one, they just literally said, we've lost your files, you're not having them back. They did manage to find them again, but it doesn't feel like there's a super foolproof trust relationship there, because the opposite of that coin is what I do. I run a ZFS NAS, I replicate it, I'm diligent with my backups, but if I fuck up, I fuck up. I can't turn to someone and phone them and be like, fuck, I fucked it up, can you help me? They're like, no, you've done all of this yourself. If it's broken, that's on you.
I think that's the old personal responsibility versus society conversation, and I don't think we're going to solve that today.
But I mean, you mentioned single sign-on. That's something that I've never really been into. Do you lot trust single sign-on?
No.
I used it for a while, and it's a decision that I regret for a number of services that I've been trying to back myself out of for about 6 months now, because I'd really, really like to delete my Google Apps subscription. Now I've used that for single sign-on everywhere. I'm sure someone's just going to tell me that actually if I create another Google account, it's just SAML or OAuth or whatever, and it'll be fine. But it's a bit of a risk to take when, like, my Linode uses my Google Apps account to sign in, for example.
You could sign in and change it.
I could, but I've also just used it for a bunch of websites that I can't remember. Did I use it to sign into this website? I genuinely couldn't tell you. So it's a tricky one. At some point, I'll just have to cut my losses and just accept that I can't access those accounts anymore, because really there's only 10 sites that are usable and important to me. So I'll probably back out.
Well, the only thing I think that I'm using single sign-on for is my GitHub account to sign into Jitsi that we use to record some of the shows. And I don't know why I didn't want to create an account. They just one day forced me to, and I was like, I can sign them to GitHub. Right, fine, that's easy. Maybe I'll come to regret that. I don't know.
I think that's exactly the dark pattern they want, because they don't want to be the ones protecting and salting your password. They would rather someone else handled that and got in trouble when they did it wrong. That's why a lot of service providers push the single sign-on stuff. It's a good idea, but not necessarily for you, the consumer.
Is it a dark pattern, though? I don't think it is. I think it's responsible, isn't it?
If it isn't a dark pattern, it is at least a persuasive one, because the items that you put bigger, more colorful, whatever on the list are the one that your customers are going to be more likely to use. So I guess dark patterns are only if they're leading you into bad behavior, but it is still a persuasion pattern.
Well, I mean, it's led Google into meaning I can't delete my Google Apps account until I've made sure that I've moved everything off of Google single sign-on. So maybe it is a bit of a dark pattern, I don't know.
I just never engaged with it. I think I migrated to using a password manager around the time that sign-in with Google and sign-in with Facebook started to appear on a lot of forms and other single sign-on providers. But it does mean that my password database is just full of crap. I really should audit it and be like, I do not need to be on this forum for this specific brand of tap from 3 houses ago that I'm never going to use again. Is like, who cares? But that's the thing. I always felt a bit nervous about it because I was like, I'm putting too many eggs in one basket. And again, when I used to try and explain this to sort of normies, for want of a better word, I would always say to them, whatever you do, try really hard to protect your email account, because once someone has that, then you're fucked. They'll just reset your password for everything. Where does the password reset go? It's getting better now because enforced multi-factor authentication is starting to come in. But for years now, if someone got your email, that's it. You're absolutely fucked. They just say, what's your email address? Here's a password reset link.
Yeah, but I found with Gmail now, it's quite hard to sign in from a new computer in a new location because they just assume that you're trying to hack them.
That's true. If you ever leave a VPN on, for example, by accident, which I've done once or twice.
I think that passkeys, this new authentication thing, is equally terrifying to me for similar reasons. Because if you're using like a passkey on your iPhone, so it does Face ID and then uses the secure enclave to sign in, what happens when your iPhone breaks? Well, you have to get a new iPhone, you have to sign into that one, and then you can sign into the service again. Or you use your Apple registered trademark, MacBook trademark to use the same passkey, but I don't own a personal MacBook. So it's like, all of these new authentication technologies are easy and more secure, but then when you lose the item that you need to sign in, you're completely screwed.
Well, not really, because there's usually a way in around them, which basically negates the whole point of them in the first place.
Right.
This is it.
Well, do let us know how you choose what to trust, software and hardware-wise. You can email us show@linuxafterdark.net. We'd better get out of here then. We'll be back in a couple of weeks, but until then, I've been Joe.
I've been Chris.
I've been Gary.
And I think I'm going to start writing my passwords down in a book.
See you later.